Okay, so we're going to do everything seated. Now, Karen doesn't really need an introduction, given how much she's been always in the news, but I'm not giving an introduction. I like ritual, so that's one reason I'm giving an introduction. But also, we need something of an introduction for the discussion. So I'll do it. So Karen Attiah started off as a precocious elementary school student in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, voted best student in her kindergarten class, though she claims to only remember her failures. This propelled her to, this august beginning, propelled her to Northwestern University, where she graduated with a BA in Communication Studies and a minor in African Studies. She received an MA in International Affairs from SIPA, Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs, after which she began her career in journalism. Karen joined the Washington Post in 2014. She became the founding editor of the Washington Post's Global Opinion section in 2016, and in 2021 became a Washington Post staff columnist. And her columns and voice have been, at least for many Americans and actually for many people around the world, just a regular feature of, often sardonic feature of our international conversation. I recommend her series of writing about America as if it were a foreign land, or there's long racial strife between the regime. Now we use the regime generally. You scoped it.
Yeah,
exactly. In 2019, both of her tenures, both as editor and columnist, have been marked by great distinction. In 2019, she received the Journalist of the Year Award from the National Association of Black Journalists. Any Journalist of the Year award means your life is going to be rocky. Karen's journalism is distinctive among many reasons, but one reason I want to highlight is her unflinching critique of power. For example, when the Washington Post decided not to endorse a candidate for president in the 2024 elections, Karen, of course, being Karen, went to the history of the Washington Post to fact-check Jeff Bezos' claim that this was normal, and wrote a column saying, no, this is totally not normal, which most people, I can report, having worked in institutions before, is not something people generally do. People do not generally hold their own institution to account. Karen is the founder and lead instructor of the Resistance Studies series, a massively successful online class where she is developing the materials for a forthcoming book on race in the media, which we shall be discussing. I also wanted to mention that Karen was the 2021 silver medalist in the US National Championships for Muay Thai, and she lost the gold medal bout in a very disputed split decision that is still tendentious today among fight fans. And she's fighting again on December 20th. So Karen, welcome to the Monk School.
Gosh. Thanks, Jason, for that mythic introduction. Hi, everyone.
So I guess I've sent you some of these questions, but I guess I want to mix them up, the order. This is a School of Global Affairs, and you created the Global Opinions page for the Washington Post. Why is it so important to think internationally, even in the United States right now, about authoritarianism?
Sure. I guess for a bit of background, well, maybe this goes back to my kindergarten experience. The failures that you were talking about was that we had this exercise to color little fish, and there's the outline. We were supposed to fill in the outline, and I was much more concerned with my color schemes, and I put this nice blue and this nice yellow, but I didn't color within the lines, and the teacher was just like, Karen, you're supposed to remain within these parameters, like the fish, and I was just like, why? Like, don't you see the colors and like the rainbows? And they were like, no, like you're supposed to stay within
The United States.
these borders. And I just, for me as like a 5-year-old, I was like, I didn't understand why that was so primary to like stay within one thing. And I think in a lot of ways, if I had to think about it now, that's how I've thought. My parents are from West Africa. My father is Ghanaian, my mother Nigerian, and so we grew up always knowing that our family, like some of our family was abroad, and I think for me, I've always had that curiosity, I guess I would say, about other places, other people, other countries, other cultures. So for me, I just have always, I'm not interested in limits. Like, I guess I've always seen myself as the ideal is being a citizen of this world, regardless of color, borders, nations. For me, like, I fundamentally sometimes don't understand why we've constructed our world this way. So that's kind of, ultimately, I think that's kind of just the essence of who I am, and being interested as a young person in philosophy, yeah, but a shade of that has been journalism, which you get a chance to ask these questions about why. So why these lines? Why these borders? Why these rules? Yeah, I was probably kind of an annoying kid, but the annoying kid to journalist pipeline is very common, I suppose. But yeah, I think that's what it is. It's just, it comes from a place of being like, why do we do things this way? Why are you more interested in keeping these boundaries and not about the color and the diversity that's within this?
Why do you think the rootless cosmopolitan outlook that you just sketched is so important to thinking about what's happening in the United States?
I think in some ways it's a threat, right?
Yeah.
It makes it so that I think the work that I've gotten the most heat for, the most challenge for, the most, and I say this a lot in my writing, I consider myself an internationalist, and particularly from the sort of the Black internationalist perspective, whether you're looking at anti-slavery movements, anti-apartheid movements, the decolonial movements have always been international, and particularly when it comes to the Black and African world, that has always been something that the fascism resists. They don't want us to connect. They don't want us to have empathy. They don't want us to be able to see past their narratives and past the little borders that they draw for us, yeah? So expansiveness ultimately is the resistance to the closed offness. Right. And I grew up with a lot of attempts of restriction and control. So I think
in Texas?
Yeah, I'm surprised. And I think that is particularly what we're seeing now in the United States. That people, America, let's just be real, Americans are not always the most known for being the most internationalist, let's just say, very insular. And I think now when people are seeing what's happening with ICE, when people are seeing what's happening with the boat killings in Venezuela, now people are like, oh my goodness, American power is turning inward. And the rest of the world for so long has said, for so many of us, yes, America has represented this ideal, this dream, but for so many of us, America has represented terror and violence and empire and oppression, right? So I think now there's an awakening about the sort of imperial boomerang of it all, that in order, particularly I think there is a responsibility for those of us who are Americans, who are in the metropole, in the core of empire, to resist what's happening, because we know if we don't, this is how we stop the tyranny, I hope, from spreading even more around the world, right?
Yeah, I want to follow up with that because I attended some of your class, which was about race in the media. So you talked about essentially long-standing antecedents to something like ICE.
Sure.
So why is ICE not new?
Yeah, so in my class, I teach about race, media, and international affairs. And so for me, immigration, we tend to look at it how domestic is ultimately it's a global affairs and a global relations issue, right? So in the part of the class where we discuss the Chinese Exclusion Act, for a lot of us, we might know about the Chinese Exclusion Act of, 1884, but not a lot of us who are journalists, who are international affairs students, or even who are, historians, know about the wave of almost genocidal anti-Chinese violence in the West, in California, in Oregon, in all of those states. And in many ways, and Michael Lua was our guest speaker, and speaking about how the vigilantes, the sort of patrols of Chinese people, the active attempts to clear Chinese people from the United States, that many of the trappings that we have of ICE now can be traced even to that. Of course, then we have slave patrols, and of course, then we see the raids of Latino immigration. But I think for me, I wanted to put that together and put that in front of people because it's history that we're not taught. And in the class we see how the Chinese people in Western newspapers, and literally California newspapers, they were seen as the model minority. They were seen as industrious, hardworking, and this is an example for whites. And then we see how 20, 50 years later, the story changes, and then they're legally declared not white, and it sets up the stage for the ethnic cleansing of them, right? So in a lot of ways, I use these examples partially to break out of the black-white binary, partially also to break out of the media binary that we have that immigration is only a Latino issue. It is now, but it's just to understand that successive groups, different groups are targets for different reasons according to the ever-changing rules of whiteness and belonging, right? So for a lot of people, that's the first time they've ever heard of it. Even the PhDs, the historian, even you.
No,
right?
no, that wasn't. I had heard of the Yellow Peril.
Oh yes, the Yellow Peril, but that there were massacres that even to this day, they're still unearthing Chinese victims of these massacres in these various states, that they're still demanding reparations and justice for those graves that are still being uncovered of Chinese victims. Wow. And so, for me, it's again to bring more, it's in a weird way, to be more inclusive about repression in a sense, if there's a weird way to put it. Yeah. To say that one group gets practiced on for the next group, and then that evolves, and then for the next group of the waves of the massacres and of the cleansing. So yeah, that's what I hope to sort of show people.
So one thing that I really just opened my eyes in your class was the connection you were drawing between racial panics and selling newspapers. I guess I knew about that from my own childhood, from the 80s and the 90s, obviously. But you show us that there's a long history of this. So I want you to talk a little about that point and its connection, say, to the rise of Trump, to the rise of authoritarianism in the United States.
So
the attack on democracy.
Right. So there's an excellent book that I recommend to everyone who's interested in this. It's called News for All the People: The Epic Story of Race in the American Media by Joseph Torres and Juan Gonzalez. And I guess, well, I'll even say this, as a journalist, we don't often learn the history of colonial journalism, even in this country. So we go back and we examine how the very, very first colonial newspaper, Public Occurrences, by Benjamin Harris, and it was the first sort of iteration, I suppose, of what we know now to be a newspaper, which is short little snippets of the goings-on, right? And
so it's like Twitter.
Yeah. I basically say the media culture sort of moved from pamphleteering to then this this format. So Benjamin Ayres, this is 1690 in Boston, publishes Public Occurrences, Domestic and Foreign. And in his little sort of tiny column, he talks about 4 or 5 things. So he talks about the sexual scandals of the French royals, discusses the French and Indian War and what was happening on that front. And he devotes a massive amount of space to the barbarous Indians, right? And I think, the argument there is that even from the inception of American newspapers, that race and the depicting of the other was seminal, right, to that. Now, poor Benjamin Ayres, he gets canceled after his first newspaper, not because of course, stereotyping Indians and natives, but because the colonial powers that be did not like his salacious gossip about the French royal family, right? But that also is a template for the format that we have, which is you got to have a little bit of gossip about powerful people, racist stereotyping, which gets eyeballs, and people want to hear about war and about conflict, right? And I would argue that hasn't really changed that much.
It's a longer story.
So in the class, we're seeing, how each successive waves of media innovation, so moving to this newspaper format, moving to the format of the development of the crime beat, where people figured out, like, oh, wow, if we stay by the courts and report what's happening at the courts, this was actually very profitable. And surprise, surprise, the crime beat ended up reporting a lot about non-whites. And that became so profitable that the innovator, the reporter who developed that, ended up founding a publishing empire based off of that model. So the argument is that race and media development are not just intertwined, but rather it funded and fueled the colonial media in America, at least, and arguably the basis for the media that we see today. Literally, like, pamphlet rage bait was a thing, right? So, and as technology kept getting faster, as we see printing presses being able to print more, the development of the telegram, the authors of News for All the Media argue that each successive media development actually set race relations back, right? Because it meant lies, racism could spread faster between the coasts, even internationally, whilst non-white slaves were largely obviously left out of those, creating that media. Right.
You saw the black horror on the Rhine in Germany spread to the United States that way. The panic about Senegalese soldiers in the Rhineland.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like, we have this idea of the media always, this myth of the media always being impartial and objective, and that is actually an extremely new phenomenon, and it's actually more so was a way to sort of sell papers as a more scientific, model. But largely, the media has had no qualms about lying, had no qualms about literally sending mobs to kill non-white people, and also back to even enslaved people. Actively, the Postal Service being used to suppress news of slave rebellions, that they literally would not carry, that news would not carry, it was barred, it was banned to carry news of slave revolts for a large part of the 1700s and the 1800s, right? So when people talk about, but what is the history of black resistance? That was actively suppressed in the early stages of the US Postal Service.
Right.
So these are the sort of things that for a lot of people are like, oh my God, what? How did we not know,
Right, well, one of the things I took away from the part of you, from talking to you about this in your course is, it's something about the essence of the medium rather than a deformation of the medium.
Right. I keep telling my class, I'm like, guys, does this look familiar?
Right.
Does this, and for us, and to kind of fully answer your question about connecting it to the present, is that I think we as journalists, we get into this, it's an industry, we get into this industry and we are taught to follow the models and the templates, and this is just how things are done, this is just how a story is constructed. And we are not taught the historical context of why. Even when I learned about the crime beat, I was like, wow, wait a second. I mean, this is almost, for a lot of reporters, maybe I still think it's a valuable tool to learn how to report on these things, but it's almost like this is your rite of passage in order to enter. And so to learn that, and in fact, the founder said this, that, well, when it comes to news, humans, they would rather, and I'm paraphrasing, they would rather hear of broken hearts and broken heads, that bad news sells.
Right.
That in order for us to sell good news, people would rather hear and learn about misery. It is the misery and the broken heads and the broken hearts that forms the economic basis for some of the good stuff. He said the quiet part out loud, right? And so it just, for me, it was a profound opportunity to reflect on the sort of foundations of our media industry, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a great book.
I'll try.
So that's the book you're working on. Sort of. You're finishing the Khashoggi book, which I'm going to ask you about in a minute. But I'm sort of going backwards from the RSS course that you just finished. So let's move to. One of the things I want to do at the Monk School, and one of the reasons you're one of the first two people I invited, is I want to bring journalists who are experiencing authoritarian crackdowns to Canada to sort of talk to Canadian journalists about what that feels like from the inside. I was talking to one Canadian journalist, and they were like, it's wild what's happening in America, like the Washington Post and Karen Attiah, but that wouldn't happen here. And I was like, who owns your newspapers? And they were like, oh, well, nice billionaires, essentially, nice rich people. So I want, I know you can't legally talk a lot about what happened in the Washington Post recently, but can you say in general terms what it feels like, what it felt like when, you wrote about this, but what it felt like when, for example, Bezos said, the Washington Post is like the New York Times, it's one of the two newspapers of record, and when the owner changed the opinion section to free markets and personal liberties, like, what do those kinds of changes feel like from the inside as journalists? The sort of loss. The Washington Post is gone. It's not a thing anymore. Like, what did that? I don't know how much you can talk about that, but in general terms, what's the feel of the media in the United States as this crackdown accelerates, and this takeover accelerates?
What can I say other than to still be in Washington D.C. And it feels like capture. It feels like war. It feels like I think of my friend Nana Hossein who wrote the book on coups. And what are the rules of a coup? You capture the broadcaster. You capture the ports of entry, right? And it feels like living through this textbook of what a coup, and maybe for me it's a little epigenetic in my DNA. Like my mother is a survivor of the Biafra War in Nigeria, right, which 1 million people died, and it maybe somehow somatically attuned to feel when something, like, basically I just keep thinking of, like, one moment things are normal, your country is fine, and the next it's not. And for me, it's been the speed of how everything it feels is caving in on itself. So, I can talk about the Post because, as you said, I've been very vocal about the changes. Anyone paying attention, the pulling of the Harris endorsement which for those who don't know, the Washington Post editorial board had an endorsement of Kamala Harris ready to go. And at the very last minute, Bezos said no. And I remember telling someone when I saw that come down, I hadn't felt that way since I found out my colleague Jamal Khashoggi was murdered. It felt like a murder to me. And but at least with that, we were able to publish dissent. So I published that piece. A number of my colleagues published pieces of dissent. I signed on to a letter of protest along with other columnists. And so I was like, okay, this is bad. Okay, this is really bad. But okay, dissent is allowed. Okay, we can live to fight another day. And then fast forward 6 months later, and then there's the news about moving the opinion section specifically to free markets and personal liberties. And
The Washington Post.
but not just that, right? Anyway, this is all public, right? So I'm not saying anything that's not. Anyone who goes back to what Bezos said on Twitter, of all places, instead of in his own newspaper, which was, anyway, but he said he wanted to promote American, pro-America values. I mean, anytime I hear that, alarm bells go off about this sort of hyper nationalism, forced patriotism, and I was like, oh no. To me, as someone who, as you said, like, critique power, so often, particularly when it comes to Black journalists, so often we're accused of being anti-American. And I was like, whew, this is, okay, on that level, this is bad. But it wasn't about what Bezos ostensibly told people to focus on. It's what he told us we could not do, which was everything else outside of that. Yeah. So ultimately, to me, my brain was like, this is censorship. The Washington Post has been censored. One of the most powerful opinion pages in the world has had its legs cut off from under it. And I don't know, I just couldn't understand why people were so like trying to figure out what is it this libertarian? And I was like, guys, you're missing the point. Like, it was done, and it was done so somewhat easily to a place like the Washington Post, and particularly, it's not lost on me that the opinion section has been publicly strung up outside the city gates for all to see, right? That we are the ones, opinion writers, are the ones with the most leeway to not only report, as my late editor, Fred Hyatt would say, we have the privilege and the responsibility to not only report on the world as it is, which is the who, what, when, where, why, but we have the responsibility and the privilege to report on the world as we think it should be. So to be able to say this is wrong, to be able to say that this is harming our communities, and it's not lost on me that they stripped us of that journalistic defense right when the National Guard moves into Washington, D.C., right when anti-DEI, Black people, women are being, LGBTQ are being purged from public life. They've decimated our journalistic defenses right in the heart of the capital city of America. I decided to, I was like, what can I say that's PC about it? I'm not allowed to, I was like, F y'all make me, I'm not going anywhere.
No, I was just gonna say.
Decide to sort of stand my ground, and my attitude was like, I'm gonna do this until I can't do it anymore.
Did Perry Bacon resign after the personal? I mean, there was an exodus of Black columnists to the point where when I first met you, you were, well, it was not that long ago, in like May or something, but I think soon thereafter you were the last Black columnist at the Washington Post, and they had made this switch and hired a new editor. It was clear they were, to me, that they were gunning for you, that you you weren't going to hold your fire. You were going to say what you thought, and that was just inconsistent with what they were doing.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not that I thought that was any sort of protection necessarily.
No, I knew you didn't think it was protection. I knew you were recognizing that, there was going to, they couldn't really get rid of you in any obvious way?
I don't know. I mean, I guess my mindset was just, and it's always been my mindset. It's still my mindset that like I'm going to do what I can until I can't. And so I don't know. You know, I wasn't really thinking. Maybe I should have. A lot of people warned me. A lot of people told me like, take the money and run. There were buyouts that were offered.
Right. I should have mentioned that.
Yeah,
you
know.
didn't take, unlike the other journalists, you didn't take a buyout.
Yeah.
And that was a, that was a big. When I talked to you at that point, I don't know, and you were, you could have taken a buyout. It would have been considerably more advantageous to you than, and I think I even said to you, they're going to try to get rid of you in some way. But yeah, you didn't really care about that.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is that the Washington Post of today, of right now, is not the Post that I joined.
Oh, well.
I mean, I know that's obvious, and I know maybe part of it is.
And the CBS.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just, I
won't make you talk more about the Washington Post.
You're making me talk about my ex all the time. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's just, it's. I'll be honest, like in a lot of ways, I'm still sort of, I know it's a job, it's a business, it's a corporation, it's an industry, it doesn't love you, especially if you're black. Don't be stupid and think that like you'll forever have a place anywhere. But I find it was, and for a lot of the journalists that I worked with, that was where we were holding truth to power. Like that is where I had the opportunity to hire and work with Jamal Khashoggi. That is where we were building amazing things, and we were beating the times. We were killing it, right? And to see such a betrayal of journalistic values, of moral values almost, to see it's, a lot of us are grieving, to be honest. But you're having, it's war, right? You're having to build refuge shelters, and you're having to keep going. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it's scary feeling like you're going up against a paper and a Bezos and folks who are being very chummy with the Trump administration, who are being very chummy with the same Saudi crown prince that had our writer, my friend, murdered, according to the CIA. But
yeah, and you worked there for a third of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just did the math in my head.
I don't do math, that's why. No, but
only geometry.
Yeah, I'm still sad about what's happened.
Well, you mentioned Khashoggi. Obviously, you hired Khashoggi at the Post. You were his editor and friend. And I've heard you speak about him in very moving ways. And lives don't have morals, so it's a bit unfair to ask you about this. But Khashoggi represents something about the nature of journalism, its ideals. Do you want to say something about Khashoggi's legacy for journalism?
Yeah, I can expect to get a little emotional about it. So Jamal, for those who don't know and only know him as a victim of authoritarianism and repression, Jamal, he was he was close to the Saudi royal family for a long time. He came from a long line of doctors, of advisors. His family had been in Saudi Arabia longer than the royal house of Saud, actually. And for me, this was 2016 or so. So 2016 even, around the 2015, 2016, the rise of Trump, but also the rise of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And Mohammed bin Salman promising Washington this new and reformed Saudi Arabia, this millennial crown prince, right, promising that he was going to break the chains of religious repression. I was there in some of those meetings when he was selling this new Saudi Arabia to us all, and I watched as people were being charmed by it, and I was like, I don't know. The vibes, the vibes, I can't explain, but the vibes are off. And then we start to see these crackdowns on Saudi activists, on Saudi, on other royals. And so it was a coup that Mohammed bin Salman effectively made himself skip the line, made himself by force someone that he was going to be the face of Saudi Arabia, no one else. And that's something to remember, put a pin in this and come back to it. And so it meant that Jamal, someone who cared deeply about Saudi history, who had so many connections with various groups of people, activists, and also, from women's activists to religious scholars, he had connections with everyone because that's just the type of person he was. He was a very deeply curious person. And he wanted to advise the Saudi crown prince. And what I keep telling people, what a lot of people don't know about that period of 2015 to 2016, which, again, Mohammed bin Salman on his ascendance, Trump coming down that damn escalator and changing the course of history. Saudi Arabia and Trump obviously have a long-standing relationship. And when Trump was on the ascendance and MBS was on the ascendance, Jamal decided to take to the pen, and he wrote a piece warning actually about not MBS, warning about Trump. That is what got him banned from writing for a year.
Wow.
It was that he criticized Trump. And so when I sort of saw these crackdowns later in 2017, he'd been completely silent for a year because Saudi Arabia said, you're not going to talk because you've criticized our new buddy, basically. So him writing with me was his first time to be able to speak out, and it was in a form paper. And so for me, even just that was a warning sign already. Now in retrospect, clearly, it resonates, it chills me even more. But I think Jamal was, an example, and his very first piece was, Saudi Arabia, has always been repressive, but now it's unbearable. This idea, again, that your country can turn into a boiling pot of water, almost relatively, overnight. So I think for Jamal, what inspired me so much about working with him was his family was put under a travel ban because of him. He was obviously being surveilled. He couldn't go back to Saudi. He put himself in self-exile so that he could live in Washington, right? He was lonely, he was depressed. He told me about that all the time. But he kept writing anyway, and he said, writing is what keeps me going and what keeps me alive, really. Sadly, come to find out that his writing likely got him killed. So I guess for me, and back to even me personally, why I feel how could I not keep going when, Jamal touched me deeply, with that when he was alive, and he would always use his pen to draw attention to those who were still in jail. When Saudi Arabia announced that women were going to be allowed to drive, and I was like, this is interesting, but what's the real story behind this? And it was the women who were being silenced first. The West completely missed that. The women who had for decades had fought for the right to drive. We didn't hear their names. We didn't see their faces. We only saw Mohammed bin Salman. And back to, again, authoritarianism. It is authoritarianism. It is an extractive, parasitic force that takes credit, particularly from the ideas and the courage of women, first of all. all the reforms that Mohammed bin Salman ended up claiming were from the very people that he jailed. Salman al-Uda, all the reformers, those people were caged, and which allowed for Mohammed bin Salman to basically rewrite time and rewrite history in real time, and Washington ate it up. And I watched, like, completely befuddled as to, like, the big man, strong man had all of their lunches, like all these very serious people, and I just was like, what is this? This is like, so I think, you know, Jamal's trajectory, and, you know, unfortunately his murder exposed so much in a lot of ways about how authoritarianism works, about how they stop you from writing, they will force you out. They will also try to lure you back in with promises of, oh, well, you can write again, you'll be safe, you'll be okay. They will, you know, obviously surveillance. Obviously, it was very interesting to see how Mohammed bin Salman used flashy tech. The first female robot citizen was Sophia, who was interested in Saudi Arabia, right? Or who was introduced by Mohammed bin Salman. And so I think in a lot of ways, for me, that story, and now as we're seeing our AI broligarchs and these promises of this tech utopia while they're censoring our journalism, while, as I said in The Guardian, the Saudification of the red lines that Jamal used to talk about as an editor, right, where the royal censors would basically come in and say, this is what you're not going to talk about. That happened at the Washington Post. And so, you know, for your Canadian friends, for all of my new Canadian friends to think that can't happen to where you are, Jamal didn't think that could happen to Saudi. I didn't think that could happen to, you know, a Washington Post or to America, but it is happening.
Yeah, the CBS is gone.
CBS, you know, and and what's the next stage of these things?
Yeah.
Journalists in exile.
Yeah.
And then what's the next stage after that? I shudder to think about it, but we have to be realistic, which is a friend of mine told me about, yeah, you guys need to really prepare for more internal political prisoners.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's just reality.
Did you hire Rana Ayub?
I worked with her, yeah, actually,
Right.
after...
Were you her editor?
I did edit her at first, yeah.
So-
She and I are very good friends.
Yeah. So multiple journalists under
Multiple
threat.
journalists under threat. And a lot of, you know, when I started RSS, and I don't know, I guess for me to start the global opinion section was for people like Jamal.
Rana Ayub is Modi's, like, target
Right.
in India.
But so many people are being chased out of their homes around the world. And it's always been thus, I get that. But at least at the Post, it was, for a lot of them, that was their only place where they could be heard. And I think, yes, you know, what happened to me in my job, I, of course, upset, angry, sad, it was illegal, it was unjust. But my heart hurts for so many people who now feel like, now where can we go to be heard in the U.S.?
It's in, so, on a grimmer note,
Can it get any grimmer?
we now have,
Sure.
I mean, I spoke to you when Prince Mohammed bin Salman was in D.C., and that was very obvious. It obviously had a big emotional effect on you that he was a few blocks away from where you were when you were talking to me. So MBS is traveling to the White House. Netanyahu, Erdogan, Modi, and Putin. What does all this show about the relationship conceptually between the relationship between global autocracy and journalism? Like one thing, I mean, I don't know if I didn't tell you, I don't know if I've told you this, but rarely do autocrats go after analytic philosophers. So, despite all of our logical acumen. So, what is it about? Why are you guys?
Because we're all at heart still maybe annoying kindergartners who ask annoying questions about why we have these. I mean, even back to, you know, even your book, right, Erasing History. As the saying goes, I think for a lot of us, like journalists are that first draft, you know, of history. And as rough and as crude as it is, there's an incentive to discredit us and to jail us and to kill us. I mean, over the last several years, it has become increasingly more and more dangerous to be a journalist in this world, right? And I think we have...
As autocracy rises.
Correct. Because, it's a free press. It's much harder for these strongmen to control the narratives and to control these stories, right? And I also, and I truly believe this, and even back to Jamal, like, I think a huge threat to these authoritarians and to authoritarianism, control, rigidity in general is, at least what we attempt to do, is to create empathy and connection, and to build, to make it so that someone like who's reading Rana Ayub, or who's reading a Jamal or Maria Ressa, that we're like, oh wow, wait, what's happening to them is wrong. What can we do to stop this? That we are piercing the veil of their constructed fantasies that they spend a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of blood to construct. So we're, and not just us, I mean, I think that it's a whole ecosystem. It's journalists, it's also historians, it is also philosophers, it's also activists, but we are...
You guys are first, though.
We're first, which is why they get us first.
Yeah.
I would say, in my experience, like, journalists, the ones who are also extremely under threat tend to be cartoonists and comedians.
Right.
Because those are also the ones who don't just call out the facts, they actually make fun of and humiliate those in power. So I actually, some of the first sort of stories that I worked on, and some of the pieces for me that I got the most heat, the most calls.
Where you're many mocking.
Or is when I'm mocking someone.
Right, yeah.
Is when I'm saying, like, oh, you guys are in power, you're effing losers. like, oh, that's when, like, oh my gosh, like, the first one I did was mocking the president of Nigeria after the Bring Back Our Girls, and he was claiming that he was doing everything he can, and I wrote a satire about it, and mocking him in his voice, and they were so angry, and they sent bots after me, and tried to, like, intimidate me, and I was just like, whoa, oh, like, this wasn't even I was just having fun here, and that really got to them. Okay, and my boss was like, good job, keep going. But I think part of this is just that we are able to not only ask questions, but we're able to pierce their narratives. Like,
yeah, I mean, you've said we talked about the piercing the narrative point yesterday, but you said something that fits right into democratic political philosophy. And this is kind of what I've always been, when I wrote Erasing History, I was thinking about too. But empathy, like, empathy is the basis of democracy. So, right, cutting off other people's perspective is cutting off empathy. Understanding other people's perspective is what empathy comes down to.
Correct.
So journalists obviously get you to understand other people's.
Now, again, not to romanticize and mythicize those tools that we have to create empathy, as I said in the class, also are tools to spread propaganda, to spread hate, to spread lies.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, again, we're all.
So it's only certain journalists who.
No, I mean, I keep saying, if I ever start a rock band, I'm like, the name of my band is going to be the Besieged Idealists. But and you can play. What do you play?
I'll be like the.
You can be our hype man.
Yeah, I'll be your hype man.
All right, that's fine. You're the hype man for the Besieged Idealists.
Excellent. So, I'll start now.
Yeah, you start practicing. I think, if there's any sort of hope, is that, the long trajectory of journalism and power in a lot of ways has unfortunately been to serve power and to serve the interests of the elite. And there's been, I think, historically a bit of a lag time of maybe 20 or 30 years, to which, at least from a race perspective, that those same microphones, those same telegrams, those same tools of pamphlets and newspapers, that Black people, Latino people, LGBT people also get a hold of those tools and use that to severely challenge, that status quo. So you see like that you have these cycles of push and pull and power. I would personally argue that social media and the advancement of Twitter and the advancement of the internet and the sort of democratization potential of these tools made it so that, I personally don't think I would have had a job in journalism and at the Washington Post if I didn't have Twitter. That's how I was able to literally speak back to these people in power and say, here's my perspective, and to connect with other people. And that was my entry point into a world that normally for people like me is closed off. And so if there is any, and then we see that the powerful people, the governments, then it's a cat and mouse. They also adopt these tools and use them for repression and things like that. And then we have to figure out ways around that anyway. But I don't know if that's...
No, I think in all of these, this is just, all of these tools for democratization are also tools for propaganda and repression.
But that's the duality of life, isn't it? Light and dark, and beauty and terror, right? And
we're hearing a lot now about this thing, young people are so concerned about Palestinians because they have social media, and so they see what's going on, which is like a wild...
Right. Oh my gosh, how dare people actually think that, baby's dead is...
Like, literally, it's been said repeatedly that young people are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause or are outraged about genocide because they're now seeing it. And we have to do something about it. Like, this is what that... I forget her name. But it's not the only person. She's been again. And I think this is what we're seeing with the takeover of social media companies. That's why.
1,000%. Yeah. Because it's changed things that people maybe never thought that the stories and the narratives about Israel and Gaza could ever change, or about Palestinians, right? And now we're seeing, the active attempts to suppress what has been happening, for a long time. And of course, to think about, at least even for me, to having to think about, working at a place like the Post, how difficult it was to even get a Palestinian voice into those pages. And now, I'm not saying it's still easy, but now it's like there are now other avenues in a way, and there's so much more pressure and challenge. That being said, the fact that Palestinians feel that they have to live stream their own decimation for people to pay attention and to care is tragic in a lot of ways. But at the same time, things are changing, and that is terrifying to those who establish a set narrative. So much of what I at least have learned that is unique to anti-Palestinian racism is the denial that Palestinians even exist.
Right.
That Palestine doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a Palestinian, meaning there's no such thing as a Palestinian journalist, meaning that we don't need to care that more than 200 journalists and Palestinian journalists have been killed, that we're probably not even comprehending the amount of the carnage that is actually going on, because those witnesses are being targeted and decimated along with their families, right? So that, and again, back to the United States, right, is that we see that these sort of things are laboratories for what people are capable of doing to one another. Yeah. And we know whether,
the permission slips.
Permission slips. We also know, very materially the fact that so many of our American police force is trained with the IDF. Yeah. We know that so many of our tech companies are supplying the information, the tech for the AI targeting. What was I reading the other day of something that was... No. A sort of operation of, daddy's not coming home or daddy's home. The practice basically of targeting a man's family and killing them all before he comes home. And they've almost made a joke or a game out of it. And it's something like daddy's coming home or daddy's not coming home. These very soft, lavender, that sort of thing, to how horrible it is. And so now the world is woken up.
Yeah.
at least.
And then we have, and of course, that democratic potential of Twitter is what led, I think, Musk to buy it. And now Ellison looks like he's going to get controlling interest
Yeah.
in.
I mean, to me, I'm like,
TikTok.
it's no surprise that so many of in the last 10 years, some of the most massive global cultural movements have been, whether it's Black Lives Matter, Me Too, these hashtag movements have mobilized activists and people around these issues. So it's no surprise that they're like, nope, shut that down.
Right. Yeah.
Right? You know, so it goes.
Okay, so a lot of, I heard some people have fled to Canada recently. And
Some people say, allegedly.
I'm wondering what you think about how to deal with these. I mean, would you move to Canada?
It's a bad day.
It was a very pretty day today. It's just a little. The wind was a little much. I will say, if I were being honest, when I arrived last night to the airport and it said like, "Welcome to Canada," and I was like, freedom. I was like Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad. I was having a conversation with someone, and I'm like, I can immediately feel my system relaxing a little bit. Like a term that I've been using a lot recently is like being, particularly in Washington right now, it's this feeling of like ambient violence and injustice. Like it's just like in the air, and then this sort of noise and this sort of, it feels like every day there's a barrage of just badness. And I'm not saying obviously like Canada is perfect, but I'm just like, okay, I feel like my system like recognizes that like, okay, that's not here. It was a little cold as a Texan, but you know, I mean, I'd be happy to come back and spend more time than 48 hours. I just need to get a better coat.
Yeah, you need to get a better coat.
I was supposed to get a coat before we came.
Be late
and
for the talk.
I was but you know, I think Canada has held. I would say even for Americans, there's so many people who are like, oh gosh, we gotta get to Canada. We gotta like it's. I was talking to another academic actually today, and so many academics who are not joking anymore when they're like, we want to be free. We'd love to stay here and continue to do this work. It's going to be really interesting to see how Canada evolves, not evolves per se, but like what place Canada is going to occupy in the American imagination as we're going through all of this, right? You guys are very friendly, very chill neighbors to the north. We're not chill right now, like, and there is this long history, particularly, from the Black American historical standpoint, that like when people talk about even Black Americans, it's like, no, Black Americans stayed, and they stayed and fought, and it's like, yeah, well, actually, Harriet Tubman was bringing Black people to Canada. She had a house in Canada. Canada has, been this symbol of escape, for better or worse. So, point is, I'm going to be shopping for a better coat, and then we'll see.
All right. On that note, thank you. Thank you for what you've done for journalism.
Oh.
Thank you what you've done for democracy, and thank you for your discussion.
Thank you, guys.
So, since there's no subsequent event, we're going to take questions for Karen within the bounds of legality and her various.
Civility.
So, does anyone have any questions? You can just raise your hand. Do you want to bring the microphone?
Hi, Karen. Thank you for visiting us, and we're great talk.
So I'm a journalist. I've been in the industry for 5 years, and in Canada, while gender parity has been reached, a lot of people of color, racialized people, we are not in the industry. It's still very much white. And I guess my question is, how do we encourage younger people to become journalists, especially those who are racialized?
Very good question. My advice has changed and hasn't changed. Like, I think for me, I didn't think I was going to become a journalist, actually, and particularly not at a place like the Washington Post. Sometimes I was someone who claimed she's so rebellious, and I ended up at like the most establishment like newspaper in a place like Washington, D.C. I mean, I think the advice from me rather to young people that I say is what's more important is developing a skill set and a knowledge base and expertise. The journalism I actually learned on the job. Like, actually, when I applied, or not even applied, like when I got to the Post and they were looking, for editors, and I got to the Post at the same time that Bezos bought the Post. So at that time, they were actively looking for diversity at that time. They thought we were good to have at that time. And I came in not with a whole lot of journalism experience, but I had a lot of social media experience, and I actually had this background in Africa, which is what I studied. So I immediately recognized that. I was like, oh wow, you guys don't have this covered. I can fill this expertise gap, and I just happen to be allowed to do that. So for me, it's always been, there's a reason why I actually, not to knock anyone who went to journalism school at all, but there's a reason why I went to an international affairs school first, because I wanted the background and the training in the world and in sort of subject matter expertise and in history and in context. The tools of journalism, like how to write a lead, how to write a kicker, how to take a photo, how to adjust to the rules of whatever house you end up at, you learn that on the job. What they're not going to teach you is history. They're not going to teach you subject matter. They're going to be looking to you, ideally, for those connections and all that. So I tell young people, if you want to be a journalist, I almost tell them to almost not focus on the journalism. I always ask them, what do you care about, right? And what do you focus on, like building your knowledge base. Like I said, the journalism, if you get in, and again, I'm not going to lie to you, this is a terrible time to get into the industry. And for those of us who are, I can't say about Canada, but they're actively purging people like me right now. I don't have magical advice. I am sitting here as a purged journalist speaking to you right now. But what I can say is that I do think the internet gives us much more of an opportunity to be able to showcase that expertise, to be able to collaborate, and I spent a lot of time blogging actually at first. Like I just liked to practice my craft of understanding, international development and understanding international affairs, and I just did that in public even before I was working other odd jobs and stuff like that. So that would be my advice. I worry a little bit that journalism, at least in the U.S., is going to kind of go the way of being a Hollywood actor, in the sense that people are going to have to wait tables and have industry connections in order to be able to become a full-time working journalist, because those spaces are shrinking so much and becoming re-whitened again. But like I said, we still do have the internet. We still do have Substack. I'm still seeing people getting around this. And the industry is historically going to come back around. It just might take 5 to 10 years if history serves us. 5 if we're lucky. 10 to 12 is historically how these purges have gone. Then they're going to find that their profits are down, their audience is down. Oh no, we shouldn't have purged the ethnics. Let's bring them back. Anyway, I'm sorry. That's not really, but it's the truth. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's in our industry. I've seen it all the time. I'm a full-time journalist, so that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. So yeah, point is keep writing and caring about the things that you care about?
So I'm a journalist, and I've been one for 35 years. And I didn't go to journalism school either. I actually spent all of my studies right around this building for 5 years. And I agree with everything you said about knowing about history and things like that and learning on the job. I have a question about your country, though. I've spent most of my career covering Russia and the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, authoritarianism. And we're doing a series on CBC about authoritarianism, wither authoritarianism in the United States. Jason was in the story we just did. I'm curious, because you just said that there's a cycle, so you're optimistic.
Curious about that too.
Because my question is this just a cycle, or is this a cycle, or is there something more at work? How do you get out of this in the United States of what's going on right now? And is there a critical mass of people in the US willing to do what it takes to undo this?
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say I don't know if optimism is the right word.
But you did talk just now as if this is in the normal course of history and a cycle, and
it doesn't mean it's not terrible.
right.
And it doesn't mean that
stuff has been terrible for quite some.
Well, I think what's maybe very fundamentally different and scary, and we just haven't seen this before. I'm very worried about AI and the manipulation of images and how crazy realistic and easy it is to be able to literally put out fake videos, hyper realistic videos of people, and people won't. Yes, there are these cycles, but now the tools that these folks have, anytime the White House puts out AI images, I'm like, oh my God, and even I'd be curious about what you think, like as a philosopher, objective, what happens to objectivity when people are no longer able to distinguish what's real or not? And I think like what is somewhat healthy, but what is somewhat concerning is, sure, we have a lot of people now who say, I don't trust the mainstream media, I don't trust them. And there's like a lot of for good reason, obviously, but what happens when people, and we're not probably that far from it, when people can't trust anything that they see on...
Well, we did serve on that point, and then I think we can return to the question of whether the cycles comment was apt or whether, because I don't think conceptually AI, we're undergoing an undermining of our epistemic resources, but it's not we did live before film, and film is going to become like painting, where it's intentional and you can't trust it anymore. But for most of human history, that's how it was. We didn't have pic photographs. That's all new.
Yeah, but then
so
when
we're
we
going
did,
back. I know. Now we're going back.
Well,
it'll take a while. I won't give you my theory of it.
No, because and then yes, fine, and then we got newspapers, and then we got film. And we also see, and I teach this in my class, how film was very much used as a tool of the colonial powers in order to justify the dehumanization and the extraction of labor and the breaking of bodies and all of that, right? So the creation and these advancements in technology, yes, it means that we can also produce work faster and all of that, but it also means that the powers that want to control have now
Right, so AI is not that. Errol Morris has covered some of this in his work. AI, the criticisms you have of AI are, there also could be criticisms of film. But at any rate, we should go back to the question of whether the cycle comment was, because that sounded like you were saying, we are, and so Elizabeth Hinton has this concept of a cycle, of a white backlash. She shows that the cycle thing in the United States, a white backlash after black political protest, happens over and over in small cities, and it's not just national.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what you're referring to, is that kind of cycle thing. But you know, you could also say, like, oh wow, the backlash to Reconstruction was a cycle, but it was a cycle that lasted for 90 years.
Yeah, this could be 100 years. I have
Yeah.
accepted that I will not live likely to live to see the damage that has been done undone. I have less than my parents as immigrants did. My father came over here on an exchange fellowship from Ghana to be able to study. My foundation, I did research in Ghana on radio and democracy on a Fulbright. They've attacked all of those things, dismantled all of those things. Twitter, which is what my path was to be able to express myself, I've been shadow banned on Twitter. They've not only destroyed the pipeline, they've like burnt it down and salted the earth, in my opinion. Personally, I think a lot of this is a reaction to Obama being elected twice, because that was never supposed to happen. Anytime there's been black progress, there's always been a white lash, and now the ultimate happened, which is not only a black man, but a son of immigrants rose to rule them, right?
Yeah.
And I think the attacks against journalism, and I think the attacks against universities, against immigration, so that someone like an Obama would never rule them ever again.
Right.
And we also know that when black civil rights are attacked, it's the portal for so many other groups, whether it's women's rights, immigrant rights, and all of that. So to your question, do I see a way out? Hope. I always think of the author Austin Channing. I don't believe in hope as a means to why we do this work. She talks about working in the shadow of hope, that we might not live to see all this damage undone, but we're going to work towards it anyway, right? And I think that's the attitude that people will have to have. If there's any risk of the sort of the American kind of culture, convenience and social media, quick dopamine hits, on Instagram, is that people think that change should be quick and should be instant. When, again, back to Trump, back to...
Change is quick now.
Is it?
Yeah, bad change.
Well, but it's, yeah. But it's also not, I grew up in Texas, right? So I grew up seeing particularly the religious, right? I'm an ex-evangelical, as they say. So I grew up very much in that culture. And I know that, they've been working for damn near 40 years to overturn abortion, to get women back in the kitchen. They've been at this for a good part of the last century.
Yeah.
And they have had the discipline, they've had the fortitude, they have the numbers, they've had the money in order to impose their worlds. And that's just how it is. And that's how those of us who are on the other side have to think.
Yeah.
That this is going to be a long, long game. Right?
That's what we want to do at the Monk School, is be the heritage foundation of democracy.
I was about to say, and my body literally tensed up when I was like, you want to do what? But okay, yes, we need institutions, we need a war chest, we need refuge.
Okay, there's a lot of questions.
I see
over there in the
Heritage
so
Foundation
we've
gives me hives.
three questions in your. Why don't the with the glasses first, and then the second person with the glasses behind him, and then over to the person without glasses.
Glasses number one, glasses number two.
Thank you. Great descriptions of our visual features. Very distinguishing. Thank you for your time, both of you. But assuming that, let's say, writing off the last question, this might be of a larger, more intense shift that's happening right now that might not be part of an episodic cycle. What we might be seeing, to get your thoughts on this, is the possible intentional targeting of certain groups of people, particular minorities, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, LGBTQ people. We also see autistic people are targets sometimes, actually quite heavily with RFK, is if this might be part of a program where they're specifically targeting people that other mainstream actors who are technically on the left might not be willing to protect, and to push the envelope a little bit more, and see how far they can push it, especially with this Real Americans program that you referenced with Bezos saying, I want to be an American patriot, whatever the hell he said, and where that might feasibly go.
Very, very good question. I mean, again, like as we've seen throughout history, minorities have always provided a convenient scapegoat, right? And it's the naked appeal to the basis instincts of fear of the other. Oh, you don't have jobs? It's not because we're actually outsourcing your jobs to foreign countries in order to keep our profit margins super high and in order to keep our labor costs down. It's that Haitian in your neighborhood that is causing it. It's like, it's almost so irritating how unoriginal it all is, but they do it because it works, right? And even back to the example of, I don't know, just take the Chinese migration, anti-Chinese like sentiment, like back in the late 1800s or so, the political parties saw that was a way that they could appeal to the Western states for votes, right? And it's been, and that even leads into, you know, Woodrow Wilson rejecting Japan's proposal for racial equality at the League of Nations in 1919, that domestic pressure to not allow Japanese, Chinese to be seen as fully human, aka fully white, translating onto the international stage. So part of it is yes, like the targeting of minorities, particularly in a country like America, is a common domestic playbook. But what is really concerning is that what happens in America, what's the term when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, right? And so countries that for a long time were deemed democratic, the first country I'm actually thinking of right now that is alarming is what's happening in Tanzania. And for a long time, it was considered, you know, safe, democratic. It elected its first female president. Look, progress.
No tribal war. No.
You know, I used to work on some of these contracts that would, you know, award Tanzania high sort of democratic ratings and things like that. And now we're seeing how they're working actively with tech companies to censor activists and things like that. So I think given this highly interconnected world, seeing how this administration is nakedly treating journalists, activists, minorities, gives this implicit permission slip for other countries to say, well, why do we have to care about these things?
All right, we're going to take 3 more questions quickly, and your answers are going to be quick.
Sure. Okay. Fine.
But back there, and then we have to go to Professor Shore.
Hi, thank you for coming, and your talk was inspiring and illuminating. A brief anecdote: Obama had mentioned to Trudeau that we here in Canada would have to hold the torch for those values that America once stood for. That might be receding under Trump. So that's just a comment. But the question is, Trump seems to be able to generate a lot of outrage and use that rage bait mechanism that you spoke about and observe as a journalist. How do we counter that with so much behind him? I mean, after all, is he sui generis in the sense that there isn't another who could use the same techniques, and so if that's the case, do we simply batten down the hatches and wait for the storm to pass?
Do you want me to answer, or do you want to batch the questions that I can? Or I can just respond
Can you do it
quickly.
quickly?
I've been in the room with Trump as a person maybe 3 times at this point. And one thing I think that is underestimated about when we see him on TV is that he has he's extremely charismatic and extremely effective in person. And I remember the first time I saw him at the Washington Post editorial board, he has a personal magnetism and charm that I remember I was like, oh, we're in trouble. I would say, just objectively, he's a once-in-a-generation politician. I know, I see your face. I'm not saying that I agree. I'm not saying that, like, he's appealed to our basis instinct, all of that stuff. But, and this is a longer conversation, but I actually think that he deeply understands the theatrical in politics. He deeply understands
The visual.
The visual. He deeply understands, and I grew up watching pro wrestling, Monday Night Raw, and I still argue. I think there's a book out about this I need to read, but I still argue for a lot of Americans, that is our, the populist sport, and what is amazing and addictive about pro wrestling is you get to have these fighter figures and these very simplistic narratives of the good guy and the bad guy, and Trump was a part of that fighting world. People love fighters. He is their hero, and I don't think we're going to shake that unless there is a competing hero. Honestly, it goes beyond politics. You're not going to truth and fact your way out of this. I've seen him move an entire stadium of people in a religious way. I was like, I have not seen this since some of these mega church preachers, and I was just like, oh, we're screwed. Because he's reaching people at a spiritual level that is not just politics. It goes to archetypes, and it goes to a wiring that I would say the Democrats have not engaged with. And so to me, I was telling some people, I was like, the only thing that maybe could defeat him right now is time and age. Right. We might have to wait him out. The Mamdani win, however, was a boon. Was a huge morale boost. Yeah. I think that is a figure that now people are looking to as someone who's mastered story and who's mastered aesthetics and who understands what it looks like to lead with loving New York City. Anyway, so we'll see. Yeah. Anyway, that's how I think about it.
Could we go to Marcy Shore for the final question? Sorry.
You can always DM me your questions.
Okay, Jason wants me to ask a question, so I'm going to ask a question.
Your plans?
You're not supposed to say that.
I always have questions, but I generally think we should let the students ask us questions.
It's Jason's show. We're all just standing.
I know. I'm just explaining why, because I generally never like to. I always like to let students ask questions. But hopefully this will be interesting for everybody. So I'm going to ask a question from my point of view as a historian of Eastern Europe, and I will start with there's an excellent book by a Russian-American anthropologist of the press named Natalia Rodakova, who through the first 2 decades of the century was following what was happening to the Russian press after the fall of communism. And she was one of the first people to panic, about Putin. And she makes an argument that, paradoxically, even in Soviet times, when there was so much press censorship, epistemological realism nevertheless survived among Russians, that people still believed there was such a thing as truth, that they learned how to read between the lines, that journalists, even when they were playing a game, could communicate with their audiences. And she says, paradoxically, epistemological realism breaks and the value of truth-telling crashes only after the fall of communism, when the media becomes infected with this oligarchic money, and that was something I was watching happen in Russia. This turn to post-truth. That's it's no longer even about censorship. It's about who cares. You have your facts. We have our facts. We just kind of give up. This Natalia talks about cynical disinhibition. And when Trump comes on the political stage, like when you're getting started at the Washington Post, there was a moment when an American journalist came to me and said, "We can't keep up. We can't fact check as quickly as this man is talking." We're used to fact checking individual facts. We're not used to a total disconnect from empirical reality. Can you put me in touch with some Russian journalists who have experience at dealing with this post-truth thing? And I was an early panicker about Trump, not because I was smarter than other Americans, but because I was watching what happened in Russia. And so so my question then is, what does it mean then? How has the role of journalism as truth-telling changed at this moment where the value of truth as such has been so undermined?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it's actually really interesting to me that a number of journalists, I'm actually thinking of Black women journalists who are still journalists, yeah, and doing what they can, but have actually decided to go back to school right now and decided to kind of go at truth from a different angle at this moment. And maybe part of it is sort of speaking to that we need to sort of rebuild like our own sort of our own canons and rebuild. Those of us who have, I would hope that I have built up a bit of a vault of trust individually over the years. I think have a unique position and responsibility to still try to tell people that truth matters. Now, like I said, I mean, I'm still very early in my kind of mainstream exile era, so I don't know. I mean, and this is part of the reason why I think it's so important to study the examples of other countries. I actually also think of the, I don't know, the role of media in like Mobutu's, Sese Seko, and what do we think about media and gosh, we don't even really actually have to go that far in the racist, fascist South, right? But that being said, I mean, I guess, well, just fundamentally, we're seeing a lot of people who are being willing to trust individuals right now. Whether or not that, people are distrusting of institutions. I guess it's a long way of saying I'm not sure where all of this, or for journalists who want to continue promoting, I don't even know, I mean, yes, truth is important, but I think we're trying to get at something even deeper than that. We're trying to get at building a certain society that is safe for people, right? At the end of the day, at least I think so. Maybe there are plenty of journalists who get into this because it's a job. There are plenty of journalists who get into this because you get to be close to power. But I think, maybe we were talking about this earlier, that we want to be a part of, and it sounds cliche, but worlds building in a world that is close to a certain type of, particularly the West, the enlightened West, that has preached for a long time that the basic equality of humans under God or under the nation is the ideal, right? That getting to some sense of a shared baseline somehow is the path to that, I suppose. And so I guess for me, I mean, again, maybe I just don't have the language for this quite yet, but I think right now, we are needing to be in allyship in a lot of ways with those who are trained in story and narrative artists right now. Like, how do we break through? I actually, journalism was just one vehicle for me in learning how to process the world and reflect it back. For others, that's art. For others, that's music. Others, that has been like so many other ways. And I guess what I'm trying to say is people need to be flexible. For me, it might mean kind of leaving journalism behind for right now, for me personally, in order to do the work that I want to do and the work that has more reflected how I feel about moving forward. I think journalism has its limits in, actually, sorry this is windy, but I'm actually trying to process this. I think where journalism can fall short is, like, we give people facts and we give people information, and we're saying this is what happened at this part of time, but we're not trained to necessarily give people very deep meaning to that. And I think part of education, part of those who are in history, part of those who are even in art, is that's what resonates with people. That's what Trump, actually, I would argue, is effective at, is that he gives, he says, this is why this matters. And I think for me, doing the resistance studies course and being intensely with people for 7 weeks over subject matter, we're wrestling with, like, we're trying to make meaning out of what we're reading about what happened in the past and connecting that to the future and practicing that meaning making so that they can discuss it at their dinner tables. One of my students, from what she learned, is now going to Arlington Public Schools and wanting to change the social studies curriculum in order to include more of this past about media, development. And so I think part of it is, I don't know, I think part of it is, what does it look like to, like I said, I think, I'm not sure if truth gets at what it is, but what does it look like to use whatever tools we have right now to build new things out of the ashes? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's like what I think about. And so that's why I've pivoted in a lot of ways back to teaching.
Academia.
Actually, to be honest, I never wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a philosopher, Jason, actually, because I wanted, ultimately, and it sounds cheesy, but ultimately I'm like, I want us to all think about what does it look like to live in a just and better world, right? What does it look like to live a good life? What does it mean to be a good man, a good person, and how should nations behave? How should societies behave? The pitfalls of democracy, yeah, it means that a Trump can rise up. Like, how do we honestly confront these things? And if it means that the only way we can really do that safely is in huddled rooms again and in Zoom chats, but if it means, going underground to do it, this is how it's been done. And I think a lot about Masha Gessen's piece about how universities can resist Trump, and she talks about the flying universities in Eastern Europe, how those academics who were purged began teaching in their living rooms. I learned from the teachers who were teaching in the encampments at Columbia. Right. People found a way. So I think right now, like, there's yes, truth, that's all, yes. But right now, I guess, in this emergency situation that we have, it's like, well, how do we find a way to keep AR communities together?
It sounds like you're saying understanding matters more
Yes.
than truth. Yeah, and that is, understanding and truth are not distinct. They go together, but understanding is more profound than truth.
Well, there's truth, and then there's
And
the
that's-
stories and the narratives that people tell
They
themselves.
help you understand.
That help you understand, which is why religion is so powerful, which is why, which is why story and narrative is so powerful, that facts aren't enough. It's when you create the meaning, and then when you reflect that back to others in order to create other.
Okay, now we're shifting into.
Sorry.
We're shifting away from the importance
I know,
of
but that-
university professors in philosophy.
We're
and
shifting
Plato banned the poets, by the way.
Band,
Yeah.
so these things are tricky.
All right. On that note,
on that note.
praising universities. Let's thank
Thank you,
Karen.
guys. Thanks, Jason.
That was super fun.